Why can't learning just be like osmosis? This is Norse Teaches Science, starring me, Mr. Norse. And in this biology edition of my videos, we're going to continue talking about the plasma cell membrane, and we're going to talk about something called cell transport methods. And by the end of the video, I can explain passive and active transport of the cell. So what do I mean by cell transport? There are two basic types of cell transport of materials into or out of the cell. And there are passive transport and there is active transport. And you just think about the names, you kind of get what they are. But passive transport requires no energy, while active transport requires energy. In passive transport, materials will go from high to low, which means down a concentration gradient. Think of it like this. If you're at the top of the hill on a bike, do you really need to pedal to go down the hill? No. You only let gravity do all the work. Same thing from high to low. It's like at the top of the hill to the bottom of the hill. It's just going to do it on its own. Active transport is kind of the opposite. It's low to high. So if you're at the bottom of the hill and you need to get to the top of the hill, you're going to have to pedal a lot and use a lot of energy. So when we think of passive transport, we're going to think of osmosis or diffusion. When we think about active transport, we're going to think of endocytosis and exocytosis. So let's talk about the types of passive cell transport. The first one is called diffusion, and you can kind of see diffusion happening in the bottom right with the GIF. Diffusion is the movement of particles from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Particles, particles like oxygen or anything like that. Think of it like this. You sit in the back right corner of the class and you've had bubbly guts all day and you let off a silent but deadly fart. That is going to diffuse across the whole classroom so that everyone hears it. It's going to move from where you are to where it isn't so that everyone smells it. And that's just an idea to think about. The goal of diffusion is to reach dynamic equilibrium. What that means is that each end is equal, so that the inside of the cell is equal to the outside of the cell when it comes to concentration, so that the amount of oxygen inside the cell is the same as the amount of oxygen outside the cell. There is something called facilitated diffusion. It's the same as diffusion with the particles, but we're going to have to use a protein in the cell membrane. You can kind of see what's going on in the GIF over here. And this is when particles are too big to just squeeze through those phospholipids. So we use something called channels and carriers so that things can come in and out. The other type of passive transport is called osmosis. And this deals with water in general. It's diffusion of water across the selectively permeable membrane. It's all about water, and it's going to go from high to low. You see that here. Here's a lot of water. There's no water. It's going to go across until they're equal. Now, when we talk about osmosis, you have three types of solutions that a cell could be in. The first one's called a hypertonic solution. And this is when water moves out of the cell when there's less water outside the cell than there is inside the cell. And when this happens, the cell gets smaller. So you can see this little picture here. We have that I'm right here, arrow pointed. Ignore it now. We have a cell right here. It's 80% water. It's in a solution that is only 10% water. So there is more water in the cell than there is outside the cell. So when that happens, the water is going to leave the cell into the outside environment until it's equal. But when this happens, the cell is going to shrink or get smaller. So if we look at the other type of solution, it's called a isotonic solution. This is when water moves into the cell when there's less water in the cell than outside the cell. When this happens, the cell will get larger. And sometimes it just keeps happening and the cell just bursts. And this is really bad in the medical field. So people who want to go to the medical field will have to learn about making sure that you use the right type of solution when you inject, when you have to give a patient an IV. You don't know, when a patient gets an IV, they're not getting pure water. They're getting a saline solution, which is a salt water solution, so that their blood cells don't burst. So if we look here, we have, on this other picture, we have 40% water in the cell. We have 90% water outside the cell. So there's less water in the cell than there is outside the cell. So water is going to enter this cell. And that's why I'm drawing the arrow. So you can see what's going on with the water direction. Now, in my class, we have a nice little saying to help us remember direction of water flow. And I call it the osmosis saying. And I can't take credit. I actually had a class come up with it. It says, hyper kids go outside. I know when I was a kid and I was too hyper, especially during the summer months, my mom would say, go outside, go out back and run, do something, get out of my house. So think about kids being the water. Water's going to go outside the cell in a hypertonic solution. So you know that that's the hyper, and the hypo solution would be the opposite. The third type of solution is something called an isotonic solution, when the amount of water inside the cell is equal to the amount of water outside the cell. This means the cell is in equilibrium. So there's just going to be, if water leaves, the same amount of water comes in, the cell will stay the same size, and that means it's in an isotonic solution. Now, we talked a little bit, let's review. Those were all about passive cell transport, required no energy. Active cell transport does require energy. It's like running up a hill. You're going to have to use some energy. So you're going to go from a low concentration to high concentration. And we're going to have to use some carrier and channel proteins for this stuff. And there's two types that we're going to cover in this video: endocytosis and exocytosis. And we can kind of figure out what that means. Endo is a prefix, means to go inside. Exo means to exit. Cytosis is talking about the cell. So endocytosis is a process of which we take in stuff from the outside. So you can see this top picture here. A little pocket forms in the cell membrane, and it fills with the nutrients or whatever they're trying to get in. The cell membrane pinches it closed, and now it's inside the cell as a little vesicle. Exocytosis. I'm having trouble talking today, you guys. It's kind of the reverse. You have the vesicle with the stuff that the cell wants to get out. Say it's waste. And it comes up, attaches to the cell membrane. The cell membrane opens up and releases the stuff into the environment. And that is how active transport would work for these two. There's other types of active transport out there. There's other types of passive transport out there. But this is a generalized information about this stuff. But we're going to continue talking about the cell and a couple more stuff. We're going to talk about other processes. But I hope you learned something today. And this is Mr. Norris, and he is signing out.